Blue and red lights painted the suburban street in bursts of color. Officer Dawson's grip tightened around the suspect's arm as his partner, Sergeant Miller, secured the handcuffs. The young man between them didn't struggle anymore. His jeans were stained with grass and mud, his face a mask of strange serenity that made Dawson's skin crawl. "I told you I'd be famous one day, Mom," the suspect whispered, staring directly into the camera mounted on Officer Dawson's chest. "Just like I promised." Dawson exchanged a glance with Miller. 7 bodies had been discovered in the crawlspace of 42 Maple Street. 7 lives ended by the hands of the seemingly ordinary 26-year-old they now had in custody. The quiet neighborhood of Westlake would never be the same. "Daniel Porter," Sergeant Miller read from the small note card. "You are under arrest for the murders of—" "I know their names," Daniel interrupted, a chilling smile spreading across his face. "Every single one. I can recite them in order, if you'd like. Chronologically or alphabetically. Your choice." That's when Officer Dawson realized they weren't dealing with just any killer. The Shadow of Maple Street, as the press would later call him, was something else entirely. But how did it come to this? What transforms an ordinary person into a monster? 15 years earlier, "Danny, get down here or you'll be late for school again." 11-year-old Daniel Porter stared at his reflection in the bathroom mirror, counting silently to 10 before answering. "Coming, Mom." The Porter household operated like clockwork. Margaret Porter, a high school English teacher, ran a tight ship. Breakfast at 7:15, out the door by 7:45, homework immediately after school, dinner at 6:30 sharp. Daniel's father had left when he was 3, and Margaret compensated for his absence with structure and discipline. Daniel had always been different, quieter than other kids, more observant. He could sit for hours watching insects in the garden, studying their movements, occasionally experimenting with what happened when he intervened in their tiny lives. His teachers called him gifted but withdrawn. His mother called him sensitive. The neighborhood kids called him weird. The bullying started in 6th grade. It was subtle at first: exclusion from games, whispered comments, snickering when he walked by. By 7th grade, it had escalated to physical confrontations. Tyler Matthews was the ringleader, a popular 8th grader with a cruel streak. That spring afternoon, Tyler and his friends cornered Daniel behind the school gymnasium. "Hey, freak show," Tyler called out. "I heard you've been collecting dead animals again. What's wrong with you?" Daniel clutched his backpack tighter. Inside was his science journal, filled with detailed observations of a bird he'd found dead in his backyard. He'd been documenting the decomposition process for a personal project. "Nothing's wrong with me," Daniel replied softly. "It's for science." The first punch caught him off guard. The next few blurred together as he curled into a protective ball. When it was over, his journal had been ripped apart, the pages scattered and stomped on. That night, as his mother cleaned his cuts with gentle hands, something shifted inside Daniel. The pain and humiliation crystallized into something hard and cold. "Who did this to you, Danny?" his mother asked, her voice tight with anger. "I'm calling the school tomorrow." "No one," Daniel replied. "I fell." Margaret didn't believe him, but Daniel remained firm in his silence. This was his problem to solve. 3 weeks later, Tyler Matthews' cat disappeared. The neighborhood put up posters, and Tyler's family offered a reward. Daniel watched the search with detached interest from his bedroom window. When the partially decomposed cat was discovered beneath Tyler's porch a month later, everyone assumed it had crawled there to die. Only Daniel knew different. Only Daniel had seen the fear in Tyler's eyes at the discovery, not just grief, but a deep, inexplicable fear. The way Tyler looked around afterward, as if sensing he was being watched. It was the first time Daniel had felt powerful, the first time he understood that fear could be a weapon. Tyler never bothered him again. 5 years later, high school graduation came and went. Daniel, now 16, had skipped 2 grades and was headed to State University on a partial scholarship. His mother beamed with pride at the ceremony. "You've always been exceptional, Danny," she told him afterward. "You're going to do important things, make a real difference in the world." His mother's expectations weighed on him. She wanted him to become a doctor or a scientist, to be recognized, to be someone important. What she didn't know was that Daniel had already developed different ambitions. The incident with Tyler's cat had awakened something in him. Over the years, he'd conducted other small experiments, always careful, always undetected. A neighbor's dog that became mysteriously ill, a teacher's prized fish collection that died overnight. Each time, he refined his methods, studied the reactions, and felt that same rush of power. College offered new freedom and new opportunities. Daniel declared a double major in chemistry and psychology, excelling in both. His professors noted his brilliant mind and intense focus. Fellow students found him polite but distant. In his sophomore year, Daniel met Eliza Chen in an advanced biochemistry class. She was everything he wasn't: warm, outgoing, connected to her emotions. For reasons Daniel couldn't understand, she was drawn to him. "You're like a puzzle," she told him one night as they studied in the library. "All these pieces that don't quite fit together." For 6 months, Daniel experienced something close to happiness. Eliza's presence softened the hard edges inside him. He began to wonder if perhaps there was another path. Until the night of the party. Daniel hadn't wanted to go, but Eliza insisted. "You can't spend every weekend in the lab," she'd argued. "Live a little." The house was crowded, the music too loud. Daniel stood in a corner, nursing a beer, watching Eliza chat easily with people he barely knew. That's when he overheard them. "What does she see in that weirdo?" A male voice, slightly slurred. "God, I know. He's like a robot or something. I told her he gives me serial killer vibes." Female, laughing. "Maybe she's into that. Quiet guy in the streets, psycho in the sheets." More laughter. Daniel set down his beer and walked out. Eliza found him an hour later, sitting on a bench in the empty campus quad. "You just left," she said, wrapping her coat tighter against the cold. "What happened?" "Nothing," Daniel replied. "I'm not feeling well." "Don't lie to me, Daniel. I know something's wrong." The concern in her voice irritated him. He didn't want her pity. "Why are you with me, Eliza?" he asked abruptly. She blinked, taken aback. "What do you mean? Am I some kind of project for you? Fix the broken guy. See if you can make him normal?" "Daniel, that's not. Or maybe you're just curious. What's it like to be with someone who gives off serial killer vibes?" Her face paled. "You heard that? James was drunk. He was just being stupid." "But he's not wrong, is he?" Daniel stood, suddenly calm. "There is something wrong with me. There always has been." Eliza reached for his hand. "There's nothing wrong with you. You're just different. And that's—" "Different," Daniel repeated, pulling away. "That's a nice way of saying not normal. Not like everyone else." "Daniel, please. I think we should end this now," he said coolly. "It's not working." The hurt in her eyes should have affected him, but all he felt was a familiar detachment settling back into place. As he walked away, leaving her on the bench, Daniel made a decision. He would stop trying to be something he wasn't. Stop pretending. He dropped out of college the following week and returned to Westlake. His mother was disappointed but supportive, believing his story about needing time to reconsider his academic direction. He took a job at the local pharmacy, working under Mr. Geller, an aging pharmacist who was grateful for Daniel's knowledge and precision. It was there, with access to various chemicals and medications, that Daniel began planning in earnest. Robert Winters lived alone in a small house 3 blocks from the Porter residence. A retired accountant in his 70s, he was known for his meticulous garden and his rude treatment of neighborhood children who dared to venture near his property. Daniel had observed him for weeks. The old man's routine was predictable. Morning newspaper at 6:30, gardening until 9:00, grocery shopping on Tuesdays, trash out on Thursday nights. The chemistry was the easy part. The psychological preparation took longer. Daniel needed to be certain not just of his methods, but of his resolve. On a Tuesday evening in October, Daniel brought Mr. Winters his prescription refill personally, a courtesy the pharmacy occasionally offered to elderly customers. "Your blood pressure medication, Mr. Winters," Daniel said when the old man opened the door. "Mr. Geller wanted to make sure you got it today." About time, Winters grumbled, but stepped back to allow Daniel inside. Been waiting since this morning. Would you like me to get you some water? Daniel offered. You should take the first dose now, since you missed this morning's. The modification he'd made to the medication was elegant, untraceable. It would mimic a heart attack, nothing more. A sad but unremarkable end for an elderly man with hypertension. As he watched Mr. Winters swallow the pill, Daniel waited for the rush, the sense of power he'd experienced in his smaller experiments. Instead, he felt only a clinical curiosity. How long would it take? Would there be pain? Would the fear be visible? 20 minutes later, when Mr. Winters clutched his chest and collapsed onto his floral-patterned sofa, Daniel observed with scientific detachment. He waited until he was certain the old man was dead before carefully wiping down any surfaces he might have touched. Walking home in the gathering dusk, Daniel felt strangely empty. The experience hadn't provided the satisfaction he'd anticipated. It had been too impersonal, too distant. Next time would be different. Over the next 11 months, 6 more Westlake residents died under seemingly natural or accidental circumstances. A middle-aged woman with an apparent allergic reaction. A college student home for the summer who drowned in the local lake. A young father whose car veered off the road late one night. Each death was meticulously planned, each victim selected through careful observation. Daniel refined his approach with every kill, learning, adapting, but the hollow feeling persisted. Until Lisa Kendrick. Unlike his previous victims, Daniel knew Lisa personally. She'd been his mother's colleague at the high school, a biology teacher who had once encouraged his interest in science. More recently, she'd expressed concern to his mother about his stalled potential. He was so brilliant, Margaret. He'd overheard her saying over coffee in their kitchen, "It's such a waste, him working at that pharmacy. Have you considered getting him psychological help?" The familiar cold rage had flared inside him. Who was she to judge his choices? To suggest he needed help? With Lisa, Daniel broke his own rules. He wanted her to know, wanted to see the recognition in her eyes when she understood what her former student had become. On a Friday night in September, he waited until she was alone in her classroom, grading papers. The school was nearly empty, just a few teachers working late and the custodian in the East Wing. "Miss Kendrick," he said from the doorway, "do you have a moment?" She looked up, surprised. "Daniel, what are you doing here?" "I've been thinking about what you said to my mother," he replied, stepping inside and quietly closing the door. "About my wasted potential." Lisa had the grace to look embarrassed. "I'm sorry if that upset you. I only meant—" "I know exactly what you meant," Daniel interrupted, moving closer. "But you were wrong. I'm not wasting anything. In fact, I've been conducting some very interesting experiments." For the next 20 minutes, as the sky outside darkened, Daniel explained in precise clinical detail what he had done to each of his victims. He described the chemical compounds, the physiological reactions, the various time frames from ingestion to death. The horror that bloomed on Lisa's face was fascinating. Her fear was palpable, a living thing between them. "Why?" she whispered when he finally fell silent. "Why are you telling me this?" Daniel smiled. "Because you're a scientist, Miss Kendrick. I thought you'd appreciate the methodology." When she lunged for the door, he was ready. The syringe was already in his hand. Later, authorities would determine that Lisa Kendrick died of an apparent heart attack while working late. A tragic loss, especially for someone only 42 years old. Only Daniel knew the truth. Only he had watched the light fade from her eyes, had seen the moment when understanding gave way to oblivion. For the first time, he felt something close to satisfaction. Detective Sarah Hernandez had been investigating the unusual pattern of deaths in Westlake for 3 months when Lisa Kendrick died. Something about the biology teacher's death accelerated her suspicions. 7 deaths in a small town like this, all with different causes but similar circumstances, victims alone. No signs of struggle, nothing missing, she told her partner. That's not coincidence. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Mr. Geller, the pharmacist, contacted police after discovering discrepancies in his inventory. Small amounts of various chemicals had gone missing over the past year. Nothing major enough to trigger alarms, but concerning when viewed collectively. "And my assistant has access to everything," the old man had said nervously. "He's a good boy, very smart, but he's unusual. Keeps to himself." Detective Hernandez began surveillance on Daniel Porter. She interviewed his mother, his neighbors, his limited circle of acquaintances. A picture emerged of a brilliant but isolated young man, one who had once shown great promise but had withdrawn into himself. What she couldn't find was evidence. No matter how suspicious the circumstances, she needed proof to make an arrest. The pharmacy's security footage showed nothing incriminating. Daniel's home computer contained only mundane searches. His apartment was spotless, organized to an almost obsessive degree, but free of anything that could connect him to the deaths. It was Margaret Porter who ultimately provided the key. Troubled by the police interest in her son, she began her own investigation, searching his childhood bedroom, where he occasionally still stayed. Behind a loose section of baseboard, she found his journal, a detailed record spanning years, documenting his thoughts, his experiments, his growing ambition. The final pages contained meticulous notes on each of his 7 victims. Her hands shaking, Margaret called Detective Hernandez. Daniel knew something was wrong the moment he saw the police cars outside his mother's house. He'd come to collect some books he'd left there, never expecting to find Margaret sitting with Detective Hernandez in the living room, his journal open on the coffee table between them. His mother's face was streaked with tears. "Why, Danny?" she asked, her voice breaking. "How could you do these terrible things?" For a moment, Daniel considered running. He calculated his chances. 2 officers visible, possibly more outside, the back door likely covered. Instead, he sat down across from them. "I always told you I'd do something important," he said to his mother, "that people would know my name." As Detective Hernandez read him his rights, Daniel felt an odd sense of completion. The secret work of years was finally being recognized. His name would be in newspapers, on television. People would study him, try to understand what made him different. He didn't resist when they led him to the police car, didn't struggle when they drove him to the station for booking. It was only when they searched his apartment that they discovered the crawlspace. Only then that they found the evidence he'd kept from his last victim, Lisa Kendrick's class ring, still on her severed finger, preserved in a jar of formaldehyde. Only then did they realize that what had begun as clinical, detached killings had evolved into something far more disturbing. Present day, the blue and red lights painted the suburban street in bursts of color. Officer Dawson's grip tightened around Daniel's arm as his partner, Sergeant Miller, secured the handcuffs. Daniel didn't struggle anymore. His jeans were stained with grass and mud, his face a mask of strange serenity. "I told you I'd be famous one day, Mom," he whispered, staring directly into the camera mounted on Officer Dawson's chest, "just like I promised." As they placed him in the back of the police car, Daniel gazed out at the gathering crowd of neighbors, reporters, and curious onlookers. His mother stood apart from the others, her face blank with shock. Detective Hernandez approached her, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "It's not your fault," she said quietly. "You couldn't have known." But Margaret Porter pulled away. "I did know," she replied, her voice hollow. "Deep down, I always knew there was something wrong with him. I just didn't want to see it." Inside the police car, Daniel closed his eyes, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. The shadow of Maple Street had emerged from the darkness at last. In the coming months, as the case moved through the justice system, more details would emerge. Psychiatric evaluations would be conducted, motives analyzed, a troubled childhood dissected in search of the point where a path diverged toward darkness. Journalists would speculate endlessly about nature versus nurture, about warning signs missed, about the facade of normalcy that had hidden a monster. In the end, the jury took less than 4 hours to find Daniel Porter guilty on all counts. The judge, noting the calculated nature of the crimes and the complete lack of remorse, sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. On his way out of the courtroom, Daniel paused beside his mother, who had attended every day of the trial, sitting silently in the back row. "Are you proud of me now?" he asked softly. Margaret looked at her son, the boy she had raised, the man he had become, and saw nothing of herself, reflected back. "You're not my Danny," she whispered. "I don't know what you are." As the guards led him away, Daniel Porter felt the last human connection in his life sever completely. The emptiness he had carried inside him for so long expanded, consuming whatever remained of the boy who had once collected insects in the garden, who had once dreamed of becoming a doctor, who had once, briefly, known love with a girl named Eliza. In his cell that night, alone with his thoughts, the shadow of Maple Street faced his own darkness at last, and found nothing looking back. If you liked the story, subscribe and like the video.